When do you get involved in the actual process of making a record?
I've absolutely nothing to do with the creation of the sounds as such. At each beginning of a composition, Boris is not writing notes and then rehearsing and then bringing it to the studio. The studio as such is his instrument. And once he has the sound conglomerates together, then I'm truly invited to, or allowed to the studio to contribute my lyrics and my singing melodies and my performance.
Where do the exotic characters that inhabit your music come from?
Well, I don't think they're that exotic. I think I invent certain characters maybe the way a writer invents a character. And some of the boys are maybe to be compared with Raymond Chandler's Philip Marlowe. And then I have my 2 or 3 other boys that always stroll through Boris's sound paintings. I have about 2 or 3 characters that always come back.
But do your stories ever inspire the music, or is it your creative thinking afterwards?
Never ever my stories inspire the music, because the music is always first. And the music is always kind of a soundtrack to a movie, which then starts rolling through my head when I hear what Boris has done. I come to the recording room with my little typewriter, I put it on a bar stool, and then I just start typing out the dialogues for the characters that I made up.
So where is the real Dieter Meier? Does he exist? Because if you've constantly adopted characters along the way, is there a confusion? Is the real person there?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I'm not operating as somebody who's exploiting himself and is kind of pretend to be natural in these things. They are, of course, artificial characters. They are characters like fiddles that I take out of a case, and when needed, I play this fiddle and I play these characters, and they have a lot to do with my personality, but they're not one-to-one Dieter Meier. The bloke that you're talking to right now, that's Dieter Meier. That's more or less the real guy.
Do you think location, the fact that you're from Switzerland, has meant that Yello have never been sidetracked from outside?
That's a very important aspect of our whole history. We had the advantage of growing up in the deep musical provinces, so all the streams that influence somebody who grows up in London or in New York, they didn't mean anything to us. And we were never, how should I say, we never believed in the sort of taking over of styles that came from abroad. Pop and rock had a great influence into continental Europe, but the soil on which this can grow and constantly create new things could never be transported over there. So all the rock pop history of continental Europe was never able to grow the real roots. They were all transplanted little trees, and the first storm would blow them away. This is why very rarely original music came out of the sort of imported world of rock and roll. Even after 20 or 30 years, it never became continental European culture, because the soil on which it grows was not transported and could not have been transported. I think the pop rock world of London, for example, is a very complicated conglomerate of colonial influences, of folk influences, of Irish influences, of Indian influences, and altogether it creates the mother of invention, which in Europe then was taken over like a jacket you put on, but never as the real thing that grows. And Yello had the advantage of trying to grow their own little roots from the beginning on, and the tree, you can like this tree or dislike it, but it was definitely an original little Swiss tree that was growing its exotic branches over the years. And when people ask me, why does it always sound a little bit the same? Then I can only answer that this music became or is part of our identity. It's like a second face, and we cannot just change our face like other people change their jackets.
Isn't it also true that being successful in the pop world and being Swiss, it is an anomaly to start with? So didn't success always seem unachievable, really? Not that you necessarily set out to be successful, but that must...
Absolutely unachievable. I think everybody from Switzerland who is planning an international career, which truly started in the black radio stations of New York City, is a bit of a fool. And I think you can only do it when you're not aiming at a success like this. I think success in our case truly came as a sideline of what we were doing. Of course, we enjoyed it, and we were growing with our circus Yello, but we were not aiming at this success. When we had our first little hit in America, which was this song Bostage, which was kind of discovered by Frankie Crocker at the time at WBLS, some English journalist asked me, how did you manage to conquer these sort of most avant-garde black radio stations of America coming out of Switzerland? You know, and of course this was it would have been a total joke if we would have even tried to do this. You know, it was truly a sideline of what we had to do.
Did the lack of a pop tradition in Switzerland actually make it easier for you to embrace new technology at the time when you started?
I think so, yeah. We didn't carry the burden of a history of rock and pop. And Boris, in a kind of strange way, being a very musical person, refused to learn an instrument properly, as if the instrument would then have been part of the colonialization of his musical being. He always, when he played in bands as a young musician, he would rather record his snare drum with a piece of newspaper on the table, which he was shifting around, than trying to seriously learn the drums. I think it was not just laziness that he did not learn these instruments. He was kind of scared to learn these instruments because they would have become parts of the colonialization of his musical being. So he recorded, before sampling was possible, he recorded his own sounds, his own sound conglomerates on tape loops. And before you could digitally do it, he was already sampling his bass lines and his snare drum and his bass drum. And it was all made up with sometimes the most crazy tools that he found around him.
You mentioned Bostic, but how important have Yello been in the development of rap, of techno, of dance music, do you think?
Only recently I learned from people who told me this, that we had been influential, especially in England, with a song called The Race, which I understand started a lot of things. When I was talking to Fluke, who did the remixes for us on How, they frankly told me how important Yello's influence had been for them. We were never aware of this, and I never considered myself as the first rapper when I did standing at the machine every day for all my life, used to do it, and so forth and so on. It was just the way I had to do it, but it was not kind of an intended invention. It was the only way I could do it. And much later I learned that I had invented something, but I never felt as an inventor at the time.
So what are your feelings of techno music today, which a lot of it comes out of Germany at the moment, especially? There seems to be a centre. I mean, do you think that is it creative or is it completely non-creative?
That's a good question. I think like every musical movement, there are very few truly creative people in it. When you look at the dance fashion which came out of this very town here, Vienna, some 100 years ago, it was called Wiener Walzer, yeah? And hundreds and thousands of composers did this, and only a few who were truly inventors and original survived. I think that's the same with techno music. I think for most people, these wonderful machines, they are not their slaves in order to create music, but the people become the slaves of the machine, and they believe to be creative, but in fact it's the machines which do their music. And I think most of this music, as much as I like it, it's the first time, maybe the first time, that a real movement and not just some singular individuals like Kraftwerk create kind of a German style, a German identity for entertainment, for music, for dance music. As much as I like it, as much I have to say that most of it are epigonal copies of the true inventors. But this has been the case in painting and in architecture and everywhere. You know, this is not unique. But the movement as such, I think, is a very, very important statement towards an identity of continental music or dance music.
What for you is the relationship between money and creativity?
For a lot of people, when they make a lot of money, they become their own epigones because they are afraid to leave the area which created all this money for them. They're also afraid to lose success. And they are like the girl in James Bond who is painted in gold. And once you're painted in gold, you die because your skin is not breathing anymore. I think money can be a very dangerous thing for artists. I think it's the second temptation. The first temptation is to find your identity, to find yourself in what you're doing. And the second temptation is, once you made money with your creativity, to not become your own epigone, but to survive this temptation of being buried in gold.
But does that attitude to money, has that also led to you, because you're into gambling, so has that also led to you being a gambler, or is that something that's inherent in your blood? Because it's
that's
like a risk-taking with money.
That's definitely inherent in my blood. I mean, I like, you know, I was basically only playing poker, and poker, of course, is not a luck game. Poker is like chess, but in chess, you know after 2 or 3 games that you're a loser if you play against a better player. In poker, the loser can live with the illusion of having had bad cards. But what's so interesting in poker is that every 2 or 3 minutes, you have a new hand, and a new hand is like a new life. And within the limited circuit of a poker table, your only goal is to do the best with your new life that you have in your hands every 3 minutes. And I believe a professional gambler is escaping the real world. When you're a gambler, you're like a boxer. You're in the ring for 14 hours a day. And all the problems of life that normally attack you, they are gone, because your only aim is to survive in there and to knock out your enemy as fast as possible. When you sit at a poker table, the 3 other or 4 other people, they only want one thing. They want to clean you out in no time. And you want the same thing. So it's a constant battle, and because of this battle, you don't have any more problems. It's like probably in a war when people shoot at you, you know. Strangely enough, in war times, very few people commit suicide because you're so busy surviving that the existential problems of somebody who might commit suicide are just gone. When somebody shoots at you or tries to shoot you, you don't commit suicide, you run. And that's the same situation in poker. I was basically running away from the world when I played this game because I could not live with my incompetence as an artist who tried to do something and never was able to finish anything. It drove me mad. So I was escaping at this poker table. And a true gambler is not gambling in order to make money, in order to make something with that money. He's gambling to make money, to gamble again. That's the true gambler.
What comes first for you when you listen to the music? Is it a visual interpretation or a verbal interpretation? Which is the actual first thing?
It's always a visual when I hear Boris's sound paintings, it's like a silent movie that goes through my head. It's a mood that I see. And only later I give this mood a character, and I give this character words. But first is always a kind of a mood, a silent picture.
But does that silent picture end up being the video, or does something else end up being the video?
No, that has absolutely nothing to do with the video. Our videos are never interpretations of the song. I think it would be a very boring process to try to translate your music into a movie or into a little movie one-to-one. The video is always a piece on itself, and together the music and the video, they become something. But the video alone and the music alone in this combination would not make sense, really. I mean, it's a combination of the two, and it's definitely not a translation of music into image. No.
Is video an art form, though, or is it a marketing tool?
It is, of course, a marketing tool, but marketing tools can be art forms. I mean, when in Italian Renaissance times or even earlier, these painters and sculptors, they would do all these wonderful paintings of whatever holy man or Jesus Christ. This was basically only a marketing tool, right? There is a funny story of Michelangelo, who, as a young artist, he couldn't sell his first Pietà, which he had done on speculation. Yeah, he was only 22 years old. So he put this now very famous Pietà, which is collected in the Vatican, he gave it to a very poor church in Trastevere in Rome, but they had to allow him to put his address there, and it said, Michelangelo, sculpture, kindly offers his services, you know. So this Pietà was, of course, a marketing tool for Michelangelo, you know. I think if you look at art closely, you can reduce almost every piece of art to a marketing tool, you know. When the kings had paintings of themselves, it was a marketing tool for their power and glory. And when the Catholic Church had another adoration of the kings or whatever, it was a marketing tool for their power structure. And I think musical videos, of course, are marketing tools. And like every, whatever you want to call it, art form, whether painting or architecture or music, there is very little truly creative things in there. Once a style is developed and has had success, a lot of people jump on the bandwagon and just become epigones and repeat the same thing. But this has always been the case in every art form.
Okay, Yello have always shunned fashion, but was your image carefully constructed, or was it just a combination of being from Switzerland and your upbringing?
It was never constructed at all. When I was wearing suits and ties every day, people thought that this was part of my image. It wasn't at all. It was just the only way I felt okay at the time. It was part of my camouflage. I always loved it not to be recognized for what I was doing and who I was. I think anyhow that all these image constructions, they don't really work on a long term, because I think people, the audience, they have a very good understanding and feeling for what's true in a person and what's just a constructed image. And in the case of Yello, whatever form of appearance we had was truly our skin. It was not a dress.
And to talk specifically about the album, just purely the title, why have you decided to call this latest album Zebra?
Zebra is an animal which I always liked since I'm a little boy. It was to me a sort of very dramatic black and white horse, a free horse, a horse which you cannot ride, which lives in Africa, kind of a free life. We try to create musical zebras for the jungles of the end of the 20th century in our cities. And it was a very clear image for me, these black and white stripes on this wild horse, which is, I think, they're very difficult to ride. You cannot categorize it. You never know what this horse is doing. And that's a little bit like Yello. We can have a very kitschy, bombastic, pseudo-Indian style song, and at the same time we can have a sort of technoid, crazy dance track. It's like black and white, and you never know what this horse is doing.
You're someone that obviously gets inspired from many different situations and things in your life. What has inspired you today?
Today I was inspired. I mean, we did interviews all day long, and I truly like to do it because talking is not just the bad side of being in the music business. I see it as an important part of my whole being. And when I talk to people who ask me questions, that's always an interesting reason to judge your own interpretation of yourself. You always learn when you talk about certain things that happen to you in your life. So it was a process of learning by talking today, and I enjoyed it, and it was inspiring.
Before you actually became successful as a musician, you were a conceptual artist. What did that experience give you, do you think?
The first thing I ever did was that I had about 100,000 pieces of metal manufactured in a factory, and they arrived in a truck. They were unloaded on a public square, and I was sitting on this square for a whole week, and I was counting them into bags of 1,000. At the time, I did not know exactly why I did this, and much later I learned that I probably did it because I wanted to do something which was on this planet only because I wanted to do it, and it was stupid and empty and nothing and not justified by the ability of an artist to do something great. It was the total emptiness of doing, and this was obviously the only thing I could come out with as a statement at that time of my life. It was like a cry to do something that, on the other hand, would not create sense within the ridiculous parameters of the petit bourgeois art world.
How was it for you then going back to Kassel, where you know, that was the point where the railway station, wasn't it, where you said, in 20 years or something, I'll come and stand here again between 3 and 4 p.m.
Mm-hmm. Well, I put this plate down in 72 at the exhibition in Kassel called, it was the Documenta exhibition, and it announced that I would be back 22 years later, exactly the 23rd of March 1994, which was this year. And it was kind of a sentimental moment to go there, because when I did it, 22 years seemed so far away, you know. I knew that would be a 50-year-old man, the age my father was when I put this down. And faster and faster, this plate came closer. And to finally stand there and then have the plate removed was like something in my life being removed. It was kind of strange when workers. You know, part of the concept was that the plate was taken out, and I don't even know where it is. It had done its job and it's gone. I don't know whether they keep it there, whether they threw it away. It's not interesting for me anymore. But when they just were digging it out and moving it away, and I was watching this plate going, it was kind of strange.
Like being exhumed or something?
Something like that, yeah. And standing on that plate was also quite an experience. The fact that I would do it was announced in some newspapers. And when I arrived at this square, it was like a pop concert. There were about 400 or 500 people there just to watch me standing on this plate. And interestingly enough, there were some very old people there some had traveled from England and some had traveled from Spain. They were retired German people who had been walking over this plate for 10, 15 years when they were still working. And for them, it was like a memento mori. You know, it was like think of death. They would always see this date and ask themselves, am I still going to be alive when this strange character who announces to stand there will finally be there? And they came to me and kind of congratulated themselves that they had made it together with me to finally be there. You know, it was really... it was quite moving. It was quite, some had tears in their eyes because for them this guy was an abstract thing, you know, and suddenly this Meier, whose name they had been reading over decades, was suddenly there, standing there and fulfilling his announcement.
Now, you've been involved and excelled in many different things in your life. As a golfer, gambler, lyricist, video maker, conceptual artist. That's all I can think of at the moment. But I mean, there's a number of different areas. Is there anything else that is within you that you want to bring out?
I don't even know, because how I approach these things is maybe different from some other people. It's not like a long-term planning to achieve something. It's much more like somebody who walks through these couple of thousand days that he is on this planet in the form of appearance of little Meier. And whatever he finds on this way, when he thinks it's interesting, right now he picks it up and looks at it, maybe he does something with it. It all came to me kind of effortless.
I'll just finally ask you, Yello embraced new technology in terms of music when it came along. Are you now embracing the new technology? It's a very buzzword at the moment, but the new technology that is here at the moment, that, like, you know, CD-ROM, the internet, that type of technology. Will Yello embrace all that?
We're not that much into CD-ROM, and I also think that all this interactive situation is a nice game, but like by definition, when you do a painting or a piece of music, then it's your piece, and this piece should exist. And if then people play around with it, that's fine.
Well, two tracks on the album on Zebra, Tremendous Pain and Sweet 909, are related. Sweet 909 is a remix version, or not a remix version, but it is an interpretation.
Another version, yeah.
Yeah, another version of Tremendous Pain. Why have you included two versions of the same track, really, in a way, on the album? And is the story a continuation? Are they stories that are a continuation one of the other?
It's basically the same character with the same story, but in two different musical situations.
So what is your favorite track?
My favorite track is Tremendous Pain. And the other version of Tremendous Pain, Sweet 909. And then I also like How How. How How has a nice little story. I think it's a very funny way to interpret this eternal problem of a man trying to show his heart to the woman he loves. How?
But in Tremendous Pain, it's Show Me the Way to Heaven or Hell.
To hell and heaven, yeah. I mean, that's the price we all pay, right? I mean, to love somebody tremendously is always sometimes hell and sometimes heaven. Hopefully it's most of the time heaven, but when you're kicked out of heaven, it's hell, and sometimes hell even appears in the middle of heaven. You never know. And I think this dialectical combination of feelings is what makes love so interesting. There is no ideal love.
And that's it.
Thank you.
We're ready, okay. Well, first of all, Boris, since you are the studio man, explain how the process of working goes on in the studio for you. How do you work in the studio?
I never start with a composition. For me, the studio is the instrument, and I basically begin every piece like a child who builds a little castle of sand by the beach. I never know what's coming out. Sometimes it looks like I'm working on a painting of a rose, and it ends up being an elephant. At the beginning of each piece, there is a sound. I work on conglomerates of sounds. I might combine a snowball being thrown against a wooden wall with a wet piece of clothes being hit on a heating system and a piece of wood being banged on a huge balloon. Together this could be a new sound for a new piece. When I have the sound ready, I'm like a painter who has the colors ready to start his work. And it's the sounds that influence the piece much more than the composition in the classical sense. So for me, it's more important to have the sound and then to have the melody, if you know what I mean.
How much of a conscious effort is it for you to find new sounds? Because you said that you make the rhythm and then you put sounds on top. So what effort do you make to look for new sounds all the time?
The sounds are the heart of my music, and the rhythm are the legs. But of course, the legs can't move without the heart. So at the beginning of each piece, there is the construction of the sounds. The sound creates all the rest.
So are you consciously always on the lookout for a new sound? I don't mean a new sound in terms of the sound of the record, but a new sample type sound.
Indeed. Sometimes it takes me weeks and months just to get my sounds. When I find my sounds, I have absolutely no clue into which area of composing they will lead me. I follow my feeling when I create these sounds, but I never have a fixed idea how the sounds finally should look like.
How big is the library of samples that you have in your studio?
I haven't counted all the sounds recently, but I guess there are about 100,000 different sounds. Each of them has a name, and each of them is like a little creature that I know by its name. The names of the sound, they recall the little universe I created for myself, the universe of sounds which I live every day when I work in my studio in Zurich.
When you're actually developing a track, do external fads or external trends like what's happening in the charts or something like that ever enter into your music? Do you ever get influenced by those external influences?
For me, everything is a source of my imagination, and music is only one bit of it. The charts are not influencing me at all. Of course, I listen to contemporary techno and pop music, but if you have developed your own little tree, your own sound tree, then the other things around you don't influence you very much.
And you said before that you treat electronics and samples as real music. I read this in an article, so can you explain that?
Of course, everything which creates sounds for me is a music instrument. And these narrow-minded categories that are made, they are always history. And when the first man put an electric pickup into a guitar, I think it was Les Paul, people were screaming and shouting and asking themselves, is this still music? And of course, it was music. These days, a musician who uses computers has a whole sleeping orchestra in this studio, and that's marvelous. In the 18th century, Most of the composers were not able to hear what they had written, sometimes for decades, sometimes they only heard it once in a lifetime. And I think if a so-called classical composer like Mozart or Beethoven would live today, he would use the most advanced technical possibilities the way they did at their time.
I mean, you yourself are often sampled. Yello's music is often sampled. How do you feel about being sampled?
I think it's a big honor if people sample. You also could call it steal your music. I think you only have a problem when people don't steal from you anymore, because then that means there is nothing to steal.
What about being remixed? Because remixers can often take a track and really make it quite different to the original.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about your tracks being remixed, because you allow that?
At the beginning, I had a problem being remixed. It was like somebody would cut my paintings into bits and rearrange it. But now I learned that nobody can really hurt my painting because it exists and it stays. And I'm very open now to whatever and whoever wants to do something with my initial ideas. It's of course then my privilege to say what I do like and what I don't like. And easily, I always like it then when I can still hear the sound of Yello.
When did you actually first get into sounds? Because in many ways, I think it's unusual to be really into every type of different sound, to be that creative. So when did you actually first get into sounds?
I remember when I was a little boy, I would take in my mother's kitchen whatever created sounds. I would play with pans, forks and knives and spoons and empty tins, and I learned it to create my own little kitchen orchestra. And from there on, I always used all kinds of things like cans or even normal classical instruments like an acoustic guitar to create my own sounds. But even if you look at an acoustic guitar, for example, there are 1,000 ways how you can strum it, bang it, hammer it to create your own sounds.
Okay. Do you believe that you are a musical explorer?
Of course, but I think every artist who is not just putting on another jacket for another style is an explorer, by definition. I think every artist is as much an explorer as a child is an explorer.
Now, one of your first releases was on the Residence label.
Yes, Ralph Records.
Yeah. So they're also multimedia artists, the Residents. So do you see yourselves as having a lot of similarities between, in the way of thinking between them and yourself?
It wasn't the Residents' music that influenced me, but it was their basic approach to their creation. They also approached it in the totality of performance, of a visual approach to music, and I adored the Residents. There is a funny story. When I went to San Francisco to meet the Residents, it took me several days to find Ralph Records. And talking to Ralph Records, to the people of Ralph Records, because I didn't know Ralph Records were the Residents. But anyhow, they asked me, "What do you do?" And I played them some of my tapes. I didn't go there to sell them my music. They heard the tape and they told me, "If you have any tape on which the music is a tiny bit louder than the hiss, please send it to us and we might be interested in releasing it." And that's what we did. We went back to Zurich, we recorded our first 12-inch, we sent it to the Residents, they liked it, and they gave us a recording deal. And for me it was like Christmas, like a very unexpected gift. And I felt very responsible that somebody gave me so much money and believed so much in our music that this was almost like a burden to please these nice guys from San Francisco who gave me $10,000 to record my first album.
You've worked with some original and unusual people in your career, people like, say, Billy Mackenzie and Shirley Bassey, which is, they're not the obvious choices of necessarily of people to work with. How how do you actually decide who you're going to work with if you work with collaborators?
We are very much like children who sit next to a river, and whatever passes by, we might take out of the river and look at it. Maybe there comes a swimmer, and we shout at him, and maybe he comes out of the river, and we do something together. We never planned these collaborations, and it was never a big dream to do these collaborations. These things just happen as a piece of nature. And especially with Shirley Bassey, it was pure coincidence. A friend of us met her in Spain, played some Yello music to her. She seemed to like it. He came back to us and said, maybe you should do a piece for Shirley Bassey. We had recorded some backing tracks, The Rhythm Divine, and because I don't write music, we had to call our friend from Scotland, Billy Mackenzie, to sing it for Shirley Bassey. So Shirley gets this tape with Billy singing, and then she learned it and comes to our studio. It was a great pleasure to hear somebody who is in the very traditional way of show business was able to do 10 performances, one better than the other, in 1 hour.
Dieter Meier on Zebra. Suite 909. Driven by the inner frog who is in correspondence with the late Jack Kerouac, a man is on his mission to a downtown hotel. It's a Friday night. Of course, a storm blows wind in his face. He's being pulled by an invisible string and stumbles through his own empty smile into Suite 909. A zombie of his passion, he hears a soft, "How are you?" from a distance. But today there is no time for talking, like last time and the time before. Do it. The Paramount Bar, 11 p.m., Midtown Manhattan, summer 94. She smokes a cigarette, talks to the waiter, takes some notes and leaves just before midnight. Here I am, a fool and a half, blessed and beaten by love. Unable to do it, unable to introduce myself as Willie Brown, one of only 5 professional tightrope dancers in German-speaking Switzerland. How? A digital brass combo helps this young man to finally give his heart to the woman he loves. How? Night train. I'm riding a night train, metal reel on metal trail, the beat of an endless trip to the city of lost love. I'm in love. Just one more citizen of this planet who learned how much he was in love when it was too late. S-A-X. On a night shift in Tobago, Glenn Miller finally accepts the kiss of the Spider-Woman and takes the A-train with just a little black suitcase in his hand, ready to smile and play the clarinet at the same time. Fat Cry. Raggy melts the Eiffel Tower and drags it back to Kingston Town, where it is turned into 5 million cans to hold ice-cold beer in that hot and fully irresponsible night of Montego toasters, who are all in love with the spiritual second wife of Haile Selassie, if you know what I mean. Tremendous Pain. Another victim of bad cocaine and light bondage sacrifices his alter ego to the goddess of fake spank and real money. Is it love? Is it hell? Not even Chola Placa knows when Dolores Del Rio allows him to touch her skin like white satin and adore her cherry-red lips for a couple of hours. Move, dance, be born. After spinning in circles for 7 hours, the dervishes of rave find a weekend solution for the job of Laika, the first dog in space, trained for 5 years to react correctly on certain signals and to function in the event of landing, which then never took place. The premix to How. After a couple of dry martinis, our friend from another track suffers from the punishment of a dry mental desert, and like so many spiritual masters in space, is enlightened only when the woman he loves madly explain him how to give her his heart. How? Bum Shankar. A contemporary Buddha fell down the gangway out of a plane from Düsseldorf and swore to God that he had not had a single drink on the long flight to JFK. It was all a lie, and everybody knew it, including the monk who was smiling on the floor, listening to the music which only he was able to hear.